All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the McKinney Podcast, where we celebrate what makes us unique by nature. And I'm not going to beat around the bush at all. I have been thrilled and looking forward to this conversation with anticipation since the moment that we met your director of communications in the parking lot at a blood drive. I think it was back in May or June, somewhere around there. We have the privilege of sitting and talking with a member of the United States Congress. And I'm just going to jump right in. Fred, if you're okay with it, I'm going to go ahead and get, hold on. I don't have the email pulled up. I've got his bio, and I wanted to make sure that we did that correctly. Keith, there it is. Love it. This is fantastic. Okay, well, let me get the music going, and we'll get Keith introduced here. Keith Self was born in a military hospital during his father's service in the United States Army and was raised in the great state of Texas. After graduating from high school in Amarillo, he accepted an appointment to the United States Military Academy in West Point, where he began a 25-year career of service for our country. Hooah! Keith's Army tours included Airborne Infantry Platoon Leader, Airborne Infantry Company Commander, Special Forces Detachment Commander, and Special Forces Company Commander. His service took him to Europe, the Middle East, and the Pentagon, where he worked with the most sensitive military programs. He deployed to Grenada, Bosnia, Afghanistan, and Iraqi freedom. During his career, Keith received the Master Parachutist Badge, Ranger Tab, Special Forces Tab, and Joint Staff Badge. He retired with the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. I'm just going to call you Colonel for short. Upon retiring from the Army, Keith was elected County Judge in Collin County, Texas, back in 2006. He served 3 consecutive terms before retiring in 2018. Keith and his wife Tracy have been happily married since his graduation from West Point, and they reside in McKinney, Texas, and are very active members of their church and local community. And it is the profound honor of Fred and I to welcome Mr. Keith Self to the podcast.
James and Fred, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Oh my gosh, man. Tickled pink would be a proper way to describe this. How do you start a conversation with a man that has a resume like that?
Yeah, I don't know. I was thinking maybe we need to redo the intro to this particular podcast, the video side, where we've got, that Patton scene with the big flag and, Patton marches up. Because, I mean, just the very first couple sentences there of all the military things. I mean, like, you're like Patton and Audie Murphy and, MacArthur and all them.
No, I'm not. You've named 3 of the true legends in American history.
Well, I would argue that you are a legend.
And as a legend, he will never accept that title.
That's
but
right.
It is up to us to say, you've really had 3 distinctly different, amazing chapters of your life. And we're going to get into all 3 of them. I'm going to start at the beginning and let you come through the growing up stuff in Amarillo and going off to West Point and being an Army man and doing the Ranger and Special Forces and all the stuff that you did, whatever stories you want to tell there of, accomplishments and leadership lessons learned. And then we'll transition to the county judge and then most recently to United States Congress. And correct me if I'm wrong here. You were appointed to fill the remainder of it was Van Taylor's term, is that right?
No, I was in the primary with
in the
Van,
primary. Okay.
And he withdrew from the runoff.
That's what it was.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I knew there was some kind of thing there. So you're about to have your first re-election as a sitting member of Congress. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, awesome. I'm going to put a pin in that and go back to the beginning of the story. Amarillo, Texas. Talk about life growing up, before West Point. What was life like for you back then? Any big memories stand out?
Oh, yeah, in Amarillo. We lived in Amarillo. My dad worked at Borden's Dairy, but my mother's family had a section of land, 640 acres out near Shamrock. So that's where I did all the boy things, learned to shoot. I learned to shoot 22 long rifle hognose rounds at prairie dogs. So, you're shooting at a little bitty prairie dog, you get to be a pretty good shot. So I learned to drive at about 10, learned to ride and rope out there and work the cattle. My dad had an animal husbandry degree, so they didn't work the calves until he was available to go out. So I grew up working the calves, and let me tell you, those little bull calves that come out of that chute, they'd be castrated and vaccinated and branded and dehorned and ear tagged and everything. They'd stagger out of there like, what just happened to me? But it was a great place to do all the boy things: the hunting, the fishing, the riding, roping, working the cattle. So, and I was a gym rat. I was a basketball player, so I spent as much time in the gym as I could. Especially senior year, I think most of my time was in the gym.
Love it. So at what point did you decide, you know what, I'm going to be a military man?
That's a great question. I was headed to Texas A&M to be a large animal veterinarian. Well, my brother went to West Point 2 years ahead of me, and he didn't particularly like it, but he came home and he said, you got to shoot, you got to march, you got to camp out, you got to study, you've got to play intramural sports. And I'm just like, man, that sounds like a pretty neat place to be. So, frankly, West Point was the only college I applied to.
Wow. All in, man.
That's right.
Every egg's in one basket. Hope it goes well.
That's right.
Love that, man. Wow. So the process, correct me if I'm wrong here, but for West Point, for all the military academies, you have to have a congressional recommendation letter, right?
Congressional president, vice president, they get a few. So it's either your senator, your member of Congress, House of Representatives, president, vice president. There are a couple of others.
Awesome. What was that process like for you? The application, is there an interview? Is it just write an essay? How does one go to West Point?
Well, I think it's pretty much the same now. You've got an application form that includes an essay, always does. Normally you have an interview particularly with a member of the House of Representatives. Now, I served on Ted Cruz's selection committee for, probably 8 years. And they have so many, the state senators have so many, they don't do interviews. But we do at the House of Representatives level. And yeah, you go through the whole thing. It is because you want to send the best and the brightest to the service academies. I do today, and I encourage you, if you've got a young high schooler that's one of the best and the brightest, apply, because that's who I want to send. But it's rigorous. It's rigorous because when you get up there, you ought to look at the statistics. Captains of the teams, valedictorians, Eagle Scouts. You were there with people, you're a big dog in your high school. You get up to West Point, man, you're running with everybody that was exactly like you. Mm-hmm. So it's a better be prepared.
Imagine it's a wake-up call for that young man or young woman that is used to being the best of the best and having everyone, kiss their feet at their high school or their academy or whatever. And then you get to West Point and realize, wait a second, literally everybody here is the best of the best where they come from.
That's right. And frankly, you're in a bunch of type A personalities as well. Yeah. So everybody there is extremely confident. They're polished mostly, and they're ready to take on the world. So I say be prepared when you go there.
All right. So were you part of the polished or the mostly category?
Well, I came from the panhandle of Texas, Yep. So my parents were both the first in their family to go to college. So, I was, and I was from a big high school. We had over 900 graduate from Tascosa, which was about the number that graduated in my class from West Point. So I'll say that I didn't have the worldly experience that many of them do, particularly the legacy families. The cadets that came from military families, and they'd lived overseas and things like that. Mm-hmm. I had not. So there were many of my classmates that had seen the world before they got to West Point.
Yeah, but could they drive 3 on a tree? You said you started driving a 10, right? So
yeah.
I'm thinking back then you're probably slamming it in a second, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah.
Yeah, kids these days have no idea what that is.
No. They wouldn't.
No, man. I mean, I was born in '84, so I don't even know what that is. I know what it is conceptually, but I've never actually driven 3 on a tree.
Oh, one of my high schools, I was born in 1970, so one of my jobs, they had a delivery truck, and that became like one of my things because no one else could drive a stick. But this one, I mean, it must have been a 9 million pound clutch because I'm hanging on the steering wheel. I jammed that thing in and reach up there and Oh my goodness! But you know,
No.
if you can do that, you can do anything.
So Keith, help me out with a timeline here. You go to West Point, you graduate, you get your commission with your butter bar, and then you go out and see the world. Where did you go from there? Because I know from reading your extensive resume, you go to Airborne and Ranger School after that, I'm guessing. How did you progress from brand new second lieutenant to, you know what, I'm going to go for Airborne. Hey, you know what, I'm going to go for Ranger School. And then all the things that happened after that. Walk me through that.
Well, before I graduated from West Point, I was already been through Ranger School and Airborne School.
Really?
So I graduated from West Point as an Airborne Ranger because I could do both in the summers, 2 different summers.
Well, look at you, overachiever. Okay.
So I went to Ranger School when I was 19. I remember sitting with my dad over the Christmas break before that summer, and I was looking at the catalog, and I said, I'd love to go to Ranger School. And this is one of the meaningful moments of my life with my dad. And I said, you know, I'll be 19 years old. It's one of the toughest schools in the Army. I just don't know if I can physically make it. And he looked up at me and he said, you will never know until you try. So I did, and I got through just fine, didn't recycle or anything. And so when I graduated, I was an Airborne Ranger. So I went directly to the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg. I became a rifle platoon leader, then a mortar platoon leader. Then I volunteered for Special Forces. So went through the Special Forces course there at Fort Bragg, and then off to Germany to the Forward Deployed Special Forces Battalion in Bad Tölz, Germany, in the Alps, the foothills of the Alps, in southern Germany, just a couple of miles from the Austrian border. What an idyllic location. Just good training. So there we did a 50-mile ski in the wintertime, a 50-mile hike in the summertime over the mountains. When the Iranian hostages were taken, we had literally just come home from a shooting house hostage rescue shooting exercise in Germany, in northern Germany. And so they put us on alert immediately, but Jimmy Carter was president, so that wasn't going to happen while they were still in one location. So, but it was a great location and a great team. I had a great Special Forces detachment. We were a nuclear detachment, so we carried around a little atomic bomb, and fortunately, we never had to go to war with the Soviet Union. But that was our mission.
So you guys would have been responsible for deployment of a tactical nuke to a target over, had things gotten to that point. That was what your unit was responsible for. Yeah,
and it was pretty much, it was going to be a tough mission because NATO thought it could handle the Soviet forces that were in East Germany and Poland. But they couldn't handle the operational maneuver groups coming out of deep Russia, these huge maneuver groups that were not anywhere close. So they had the Special Forces teams, they had the dual-capable nuclear aircraft, and they had the short-range tactical nukes that Reagan had put in place. Or they weren't there yet. It was the longer range. But those were supposed to handle the deep fight. So we would have gone deep into enemy territory to try to stop the large maneuver groups coming out of deep Russia. Wow. That was our mission.
So you were the football. When we talk about the nuclear football, you were the football.
Well, that's what the president carries around, or somebody carries around for him. But
when you say deep, you're physically.
Yeah. We would have been deep, and like I say, I'm glad we didn't have to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm just looking here and doing some basic math of the years. My word, man, you have seen quite a bit of American military history firsthand. What is it like for you as you reflect on that chapter of your life? Obviously, the world was a very different place in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. When did you retired? So you started 2006. You started county judge. So I'm guessing you retired shortly before that point.
Well, it's interesting, and back to your history, my first combat deployment was Grenada in '83.
Yeah.
My last was in 2002, 2003. So, I saw all of that in between there. So I actually retired the first time in 1999. So I came home to Texas. I got recalled to active duty to go work for Tommy Franks in the Central Command, which sent me to Afghanistan for kind of a short period of time. When I still knew some of the guys on the 18th Airborne Corps staff. Because at that time, 18th Airborne Corps had never worked for Central Command. So I deployed forward to help that transition, and then came home for Iraqi freedom when we broke that out from the the ultra classified into the operational section. So then I came back and then deployed to the Gulf with Central Command again for Iraqi freedom. So
Wonderful. And when you're sitting there at that point in your career, you're not deploying into active you're not leading a team. You're more on the leadership side of things with your standing there at the board helping make decisions, or are you still inserting in theater at that point?
No, we were building the coalition team at that point.
Gotcha.
Because I had done that in NATO. For my last assignment on active duty before I retired was building the forces to go to Bosnia and Kosovo, which included going into Bosnia proper to patrol with the Brits, patrol with the Americans to make sure that I knew what they needed, and then go back and negotiate with the 37 nations that were building the forces for Bosnia and then eventually Kosovo. But in Iraqi freedom, I was actually in the island of Qatar. Our tongues don't work that way.
That Q city, right?
Yeah. So I was in Qatar, in the Gulf. We were actually building the forces, and then when we went forward, deploying the forces. For instance, we deployed the Australian Special Forces 3 days before the attack. So that's the sort of thing I was doing then.
Man. Reflect on, sorry, I had to adjust my mic there, if you will, the leadership lessons, the tidbits that you picked up during those last few years of military service, where you're in a very logistical leadership, organizational hierarchy kind of position where you're at the chessboard, you're moving pieces around and helping make sure that everything works the way that it's supposed to. And then your next job is county judge of Collin County, one of the fastest growing counties, if not the fastest growing county in America during your tenure. How did your time as a military officer, as someone who was responsible for executive functions, serve you well as you moved into the next phase of your career of county judge for 12 years?
That is a great question, and people need to understand how great the question is, because all of your tactical time early in your career is with the troops. Now, you learn great leadership lessons there, but when you get to the joint staff level, the Pentagon, NATO, European Command, and then Central Command, that's exactly what you're doing, more executive functions, planning functions. And frankly, it stood me in good stead, because you have to have influence. Because in a staff position in the military, in the Pentagon, for instance, you don't have any authority. But if you don't have influence, you don't get anything done. So as the county judge, you're one of 5 on the commissioner's court. Yes, you're the presiding officer of the commissioner's court, but you better know how to get 3 votes.
Yeah.
Because the first thing they tell you when you become a county judge is learn to count to 3.
Yep.
Because you've got to have some influence, because there's very little independent personal authority as the county judge. Yes, in emergency management functions there is, but in normal life, building roads, tax rates, things like that, you need 3 votes, and that's how the commissioner's court operates.
Man, no, that's fantastic. I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit in chronology. Sorry, Fred. Thank you for indulging me here.
Go ahead.
Your successor in that role, Mr. Chris Hill, went through one of the most challenging stages, I would imagine, of any county judge ever in the history of Collin County. What was it like for you to be the predecessor, with 25 years of military experience? What was that relationship like with your successor? Did you and Chris have conversations on, Keith, what in the world, man? How do you suggest I handle this? Because I mean, no one goes to school to be a county judge during a global pandemic. I imagine that was an exceptionally difficult time. Were you able to provide some clarity or some insight or advice to your successor in that role? I know you weren't in the seat anymore, but I mean, yeah, I imagine you were still very much helping out from the next guy to hold the chair after you.
Well, Chris had served on the commissioner's court with me, of course, as a commissioner. And no, it was right the opposite. I intentionally stepped away so that he could make the job his, so that he could find his own way. Now, we did talk occasionally. I won't deny that we did, but it was Chris's to design as he wanted to. So I told him I was available anytime he wanted to talk, but I was not going to have a seat at the table to offer him advice daily. No, it was Chris's to design, and he did that.
No, I cannot wait to get the other side of that coin. I know Fred and I have both been communicated with Chris and basically gave him an open invitation to come sit in that chair and have this kind of conversation with us.
That's right.
Oh, I cannot wait to hear his side.
Story.
Being a county judge of more than 1 million citizens in the county during a global pandemic, that'll be a great time. But for today, we're sitting here talking with a different flavor of leaders. So. Fred, jump in, man. I've donated this.
You have like, I'm going over my mental checklist of all the things that you shared with. So you married your wife right after graduating from the military academy. How did you meet?
We actually met at her Young Life Leaders House. So it's one of our great stories. After a Rutgers football game, a senior cadet, he'd actually graduated, invited some cadets over to this Young Life Leaders house. Tracy was there. There were 15 cadets, and there were 5 girls, and I was her third choice.
Oh man, those ratios are not in your favor.
Yeah, no. And all you cadets showed up. Were you in a uniform, or were you just casual?
I think we were in our uniform because we'd just come from the football game.
So you all showed up and you all looked exactly the same, which made yourself stand out. So now, how many years has that been now that you've been married?
49.
49. And children?
We could not have children.
Okay.
No, it's just the two of us. Although my wife heads out to Sierra Leone, West Africa next month to once again go visit the 5 kids that we consider ours. This will be her 4th trip. I've been twice, and so we're watching them grow up and mature, and just delighted with their progress.
How about that?
Yeah.
That's interesting. You shared about your dad. Just, basically he never promoted a sense of doubt. From what I understand, that he was just like, well, you never know unless you try. Right.
And that's been with me my entire career, because I've run into other situations, and you never know until you try. Mm-hmm. You've got to be willing to fail, though, to accomplish great things. Mm-hmm. So, and I think that's part of our world today. Certainly in the military, I know in Congress, people are just not willing to risk. Mm-hmm. They're not willing to risk. You've got to be willing to lose before you will gain any great accomplishments.
So when it comes to that, we're sure to throw a parade for when we get the W. Is there any particular time or instance where you can say, you know what, I lost here, but I gained so much more in your career?
Oh, absolutely. There was one time, and the details are. Won't share the details, but I was given a mission that was kind of all 3: illegal, immoral, and unethical. And I asked to be relieved of the mission, and I was sure that it would be a career detriment, and it turned out not to be. And I'll leave it at that.
Man, that's the stuff movies are made out of.
Yep, I'm telling you. You make a moral stand and end up better for it.
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
Yeah, and I think that's particularly tough, especially nowadays, because if there's certainly something that's very polarizing, it's conflicts. I mean, that's all over the news. So to hear you say that, that's good that you have your ethics, you have your morals, and you stand on them, and it reigns true in the end.
Well, Keith, I want to make sure that we give enough time for you to talk about the current era of your life and what you're up to and what you are aspiring for the voters to do in November. But before we do that, I want to reflect on your time as county judge. You served 3 terms, 12 years. You were elected and then reelected and then reelected again because the good people of Collin County said, you know what, you're doing a good job. Why don't you keep doing that?
Right.
Just stay over there and keep doing a good job. We like you. Reflect on that. What are some of the big accomplishments that you're very proud of, lessons that you've learned, anything from that chapter of your life you want to share with us?
Yeah, a couple. First of all, we cut the county tax rate by almost 30% over those 12 years. I mean, think about that. Because frankly, Collin County's still got a very low tax rate. I don't know where it is today across the state, but at one time it was the lowest in the state, and we're one of the 6 largest counties in the state. It's still very low. The other is the making the retirement system whole. At one point, and I'm trying to simplify this, but every dollar that you are short in your retirement system, they charge you interest on. So we were getting a couple of interest points on our reserves, and they were charging us 9% interest on the dollars that we were short. It makes no sense. So over, I think, 2 or 3 years, we put $55 million into the county retirement system to draw down, to bring it up to par. And that saved us huge amounts of money.
Wow.
So I think the Commissioner's Court did a good job setting the environment that people thought we were business friendly, we were family friendly. Certainly we're safe. The judicial system in Collin County, you know, we record all the conversations from the people that are in jail, in the county jail. More than once, they would come to me and say, well, we heard it again. Some guy, and they know we're recording them. Some guy again said, well, I wish I had committed this crime in Dallas County rather than Collin County. Because our judicial system is good.
No, that's
I just want to throw out that notification there. So for our listening audience, and we don't believe we have any shady or scandalous type listeners frequently, but if you're going to commit a crime, don't do it here.
Well, and just, you know, there was a show that used to come on Sunday afternoons and some sort of syndication thing. It was America's Dumbest Criminals. And that was an amusing, like, I'm reflecting on what you just said. It's like, wow, that is a very unintelligent thing to say. But here we are. So, you know, transitioning now, Fred, you want to, you know, anything you want to start off with?
Well, you know, you are in an elected position. Why are you the better choice?
Well, you're just jumping right in, huh?
Yeah, let's go for it.
So Texas District 3, the good people of Texas District 3 that comprises parts of Collin and Grayson counties, if I understand. Hunt County. Not great. I got them switched up again, man.
It's
Collin
all over
and
there.
Hunt County. The voters have, I don't know if is there a third-party candidate or is it just you? I'm not aware of a third-party candidate.
I think it's just the two of us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. No, and we had your opponent on a few weeks ago. We tried to have you guys on the same time, and scheduling as a member of Congress, you know, what do you know? It's difficult sometimes. Right. The good people of Texas District 3 have a choice between you and Sandeep. Different visions, different philosophies and whatnot. That just to frame the question before we just jump straight in. It's like, why are you better? It's like, hold on a second. Let's frame the question first.
No candy,
let
no
our
flowers.
Listeners,
just jump right in.
You just came in, you know, met her at the door and just tried to plant one on her, huh? No, you take her to dinner first, Fred. Come on.
But he's used to these odds, though. I mean, he just said, you know, there's 15 of them, and there's only five ladies at this Young Life conference, and you know, and yeah. I'm sure, you know, given all the things that he said, I'm you know, you talked about. You know, the calf comes in one end of the chute and bam, 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 bam's processed out the other side. It was probably similar when you first enrolled, right? You walked in with a full head of hair and walked out with, you know, a dome, a handful of clothes.
The Army cut his hair and it never came back.
And shots.
That's right. No,
yeah,
that's the only time I will poke any fun at this interview. I just made the joke about a sitting member of Congress. I don't know what I'm thinking. Go ahead, Fred. You know, why is Keith Self the better choice for Texas District 3?
Because you elect someone to represent you. And I know the people of District 3. We know the numbers. The people of District 3 are very conservative, generally conservative, mostly conservative, however you want to frame that. And that means that they want someone to represent them. My title is not congressman. My title is representative. So I'm supposed to represent the people in Congress.
Yep.
And frankly, if you want someone to represent your values in Congress, in this district, I don't represent San Francisco. I don't represent Houston. I represent Congressional District 3, which is most of Collin County and most of Hunt County, and it's a fairly conservative area. So my experience, both in the military, being around the world, knowing different cultures, the cultural makeup of CD3, particularly Collin County, is changing. So knowing the cultures that I was a part of as I traveled around the world, and then my time at the county, I'm amazed at how my county judge experience is helping me in this, because they bring me issues that do have a federal nexus to them, but I know the issue because I dealt with it as the county judge. Now, there's a federal nexus in our issues because there has to be, but I know the issues because I was the county judge. Without the experience, I mean, I don't know how you would do this job. It would take you a long time to get up to speed of the issues. Plus, there are basically two parts of this job. One is the district. Now, the district is diverse, and it's heavy national security, and the other is the national security issue, the FISA vote. If you don't know what that is, look it up. The military today, the 56 wars that are going around the world, including 92 countries. You know, that's amazing. There's only like 195 countries in the world. 92 of them are engaged in conflict today. We've got the Middle East. We've got the Ukraine, Russia. We've got Taiwan looking down the barrel of the communist Chinese from the mainland. So all that experience makes a difference. The county judge experience, because our debt is now $35 trillion in debt. I cut our debt. We didn't have any debt. We had huge reserves. We fixed the retirement system. So just the financial dealings in a government setting is also important. So there's no other way to put it. Experience counts when you get to this level of a position. And frankly, we've got a hard row to hoe in Congress today, because I think our debt service just went over $1 trillion a year. I mean, literally the last couple of days.
Wow.
So we're spending way more now than we spend on all of the Department of Defense. We've got to get that under control. That takes hard decisions. So if you've not, and I tell people all the time, everyone runs as a conservative, even in my party. But frankly, not everyone votes as a conservative. So they're theoretically conservative. I want the people that are operationally conservative, that are willing to take those tough votes, because our people are hurting now from the inflation. I mean, yeah, it's down almost to where they want it to go now, but frankly, we're still suffering from the 20% inflation of the last 3 years. When you count the 3.6% reduction in real wages, our families are looking at basically a 25% across the board inflation rate, which is that decrease in their lifestyle.
Yep.
And in some areas, it's far more than 25%. So these are the issues that you've got to grapple with hard votes.
Looking at specifically consumer price index and average cost of, I forget how many it was, 20-something different categories of basic consumer goods, the numbers don't lie. Everything costs more than it did 4 years ago. A lot of that is due to very complex issues regarding supply and demand. COVID wrecked a whole bunch of industries. The production of various consumer goods is probably near the top of the list of all the things that are still reeling, 2 years after the pandemic was officially seen as, all right, we're good. We're going to start returning to normal now. But I look at my wallet here on Friday the 13th, September 24th.
Oh, it is Friday the 13th.
Friday the 13th in
right.
September 2024, and I'm looking at things going, no, they're still really bad economically. The pricing, gas price, I know there's a very complex thing. The president, Congress can't just flip a switch and change the price of gas. That's a very complex thing that is, globally active. But looking at the way that just the run-of-the-mill citizen is living their life, putting gas in their car, putting food on their table, paying their rent, housing costs, mortgage interest rates and whatnot, everything is so much more difficult now than it was 4 years ago. to hear that we're spending $1 trillion a year on the interest for the national debt, that's a staggering statistic. So I guess my question then, speaking on behalf of your colleagues in Congress, how in the world does Congress make any impact when we have almost 50-50? When you look at the governing body, I think the Republican Party has an 8-seat majority, if I remember correctly. It's a very small number. How in the world does Congress make progress on these things that matter when American confidence in Congress to be able to be an effective governing body, I think, is near single digits? It was like 11 or 12% approval rating last time I looked at this a few months ago. How in the world do you help move things forward? How does anybody from Texas Congressional District 3 make things better?
It's a great question because we control, as you say, a very narrow majority in the House of Representatives. The other party controls the Senate.
Yeah.
The other party controls the White House.
Yeah.
So it is very difficult to get anything that looks like my district, that my district would want me to do through the Senate, through the White House into law. Not only that, but we have a president that refuses to obey the law on the southern border. Let's just be honest.
Yep.
I got in trouble yesterday, or day before yesterday, I guess, on the floor of the House when I said, and I practiced lawless administration. I practiced lawless administration, but I've said lawless president so many times that they said, wait, you can't say that. So I said lawless president on the floor of the House. You're not supposed to do that. So they kind of corrected me. You know, it's no big deal, but you're not supposed to, because we can pass laws, but we're the legislative branch. We don't execute the laws. All we do is make the laws. In fact, we only control 1/2 of the body that makes the laws.
Yeah.
You have to have both bodies pass something before it gets to the White House, before it becomes law. That's our problem today. We need the Senate. We need the White House so that we can make these changes. And go back to your, look, the price of gas is not that complex. The war on fossil fuel in this country is real. All we got to do is drill, baby, drill. We would be so dominant around the world. We've got the reserves. We should be not sufficient, not independent. We should be dominant in the fossil fuel industry. I don't care if you want to buy your electricity from wind or solar, but turn loose the fossil fuel and it would take care of a lot of these problems, because look, fuel, energy is the basis of civilization. We've got on these lights, we've got on these microphones, we've got on these cameras. It is the basis of civilization. We must have more energy, and we can be energy dominant in the world. We should be energy dominant.
Texas should be energy dominant.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
You know, so it's, every so often, you know, I run into people and they're like, you know, we need to secede from the Union and just become our own nation. And, you know, part of me is like, well, it kind of makes sense, but the other part is like, well, no, we need everybody else. But you know, I think that you know, and you've taken some pretty strong points on, you know, specifically the lawlessness and our southern border. Do you know, we hear all the time from the whichever media outlet you're tuned into that there is or is not a crisis at the border. Can you say definitively that you can see an effect of illegal immigration here in our district?
Absolutely. You really ought to have the sheriff on.
Oh, yeah.
Get Sheriff Jim Skinner on.
Oh, yeah. He's on our list.
Let him fill you with the data. The cartels are running rampant across Collin County.
Yep.
Get Jim Skinner to talk to you about this issue. He knows all of the details. He could spend the afternoon with you. Absolutely, we see it in Collin County, Hunt County. Cartels run all over the nation. They're not just on the border, because when these kids and women and men come across the border, they pay $9,000, $10,000, $15,000 for the privilege of being transported across the border by the cartels. And when they get here, how are they going to be paid that $9,000, $10,000, $15,000? The sex trade, the indentured servanthood. They are going to give part of their paycheck if they get a job to the cartel. They're going to pay it back. So the cartels are basically collecting, however they collect, whatever the payment is, they're collecting across America today. So make no mistake about it, the cartels, I am pushing, in fact, I have sponsored a bill to declare the cartels foreign terrorist organizations because it would give us more tools to use against them. And I think that's a minimum of what we ought to do because the cartels control the border. Mexico is certainly along the border is almost a failed state. So, yeah, there's a crisis on the southern border. Let me just tell you one story. In fact, I talked to him again about the story yesterday morning at breakfast. Andy Barr, colleague of mine in the Congress, I was on the border about 2 months ago now, I think it was, and he was getting his briefing, and they saw, he says 9 now, I thought it was 11. He said they saw 9 men, no women, come across the border. They sent agents out to intercept them. They disappeared in some trees. They couldn't find them, so they came back. And so he asked the agents, he said, now, how are you going to count them? Are those known gotaways, which is one of the categories? And they said, no, by policy, under the Biden administration, we are not allowed to count them at all. And I said, what do you mean you're not allowed to count them? And he said, because the Biden administration says they may have changed their mind and gone back across the border. You don't know that, so you can't count them. So whatever number you're using, 9, 10, 15, 20 million, you're probably low.
I don't have words for that. That defies logic and basic notion of intelligence. I'm dumbstruck at that.
So you only count the ones that you see physically disappear northbound.
Into the interior, that's correct.
Wow.
Or you put on a bus or you put on a plane into the interior.
Yeah, see,
By the way,
didn't share that.
You know, Governor Abbott gets blamed for moving all of these people to the interior. He's only moving about 20% of them to New York City, for instance. The federal government is moving through NGOs and ICE, moving 80% of them.
It makes about as much sense as confronting a kid who goes into a convenience store and steals a candy bar and saying, well, I'm going to charge you with theft. You stole a candy bar. No, I didn't. But I saw you put it in your pocket. I didn't put it in my pocket. But I see the outline of a candy bar in your pocket right now. No, you don't. There's not a candy bar in my pocket. But you can't reach into the pocket and grab the candy bar and prove the kid guilty, so you have to let him go. Like, that makes about as much sense.
Yeah.
Come on.
Like, so what gets you up in the morning and motivates you? Because, you know, as just, you know, a regular person out here, I see this political gridlock, finger pointing, name calling, information spin. You know, what gets you up in the morning and put your boots on and get right back after it?
What gets me up in the morning is because we have a constitutional republic to save. Now, this nation will survive. The question is, will our constitutional republic survive? The other party loves to talk about democracy. A true democracy is the rule of the mob. We are a constitutional republic. We in the House of Representatives cannot pass any law we want to. We have to pass a law that is consistent with the U.S. Constitution, or we're going to get slapped down, as the president has been slapped down several times over his student loan forgiveness programs. That's not constitutional. He does not have the authority to override the law passed by the legislative branch. And the Supreme Court's told him. And he said, I don't care. So what gets me up in the morning is the survival of our constitutional republic. I spent 25 years of my lifetime in uniform, the cloth of this nation, and I will be dadgummed if I'm going to let this nation, the constitutional republic, fall because people just don't want to obey the law. The constitutional republic, rule of law, is the basis of this, which includes in the First Amendment the five rights that are in the First Amendment of the Constitution, the Second Amendment of the Constitution, on down through the 10th Amendment. This is a constitutional republic to save, and that's what gets me up in the morning.
Excellent. Love it.
So in regards to the time that is spent as the representative of Texas House District 3, it's so hard because it's only 2 years. And of that 2 years, you're getting situated, you're having staff in place and onboarding and getting everything squared away as a first term congressman, and then you blink twice and it's time to start working on the reelection campaign. How in the world have you regimented yourself as a military man, as someone who is a very disciplined person? How have you made the most of your time in Congress while balancing the need to be a good public communicator and present your vision and help people understand why you deserve a second term while still doing your first term?
Yeah, so time is almost split evenly between D.C. and the district.
Yeah.
Half a day travel each way, 3 days there, 3 days here. These days are over the weekend, though. So you have to have a good social media presence. And the second thing is I've done coffees with Keith throughout my first term. Saturday mornings, we go to one of the towns, cities around the district, and we have coffee. It's a retail politics where I sit with as many people that want to come. I talk for a very few minutes, and then I take questions because I want to hear from my constituents. I want to hear what they're thinking. I want to hear what their issues are. So that's how I get ready for re-election. I'm here, excuse me, every weekend that I'm home, most weekends that I'm home, I'm having a coffee with Keith. So people get, and often what encourages me is someone will occasionally see me elsewhere and they'll say, I haven't made it to a coffee with Keith, but I plan to. Well, it's been almost 2 years, but they know about it.
Yeah.
So they know that I hold these. And I've heard several other candidates now, they're either going to hold bagels with a guy with a B, they're going to have, I won't say the names, but they're picking up on this idea of routine interaction with your constituents. And I think that's vitally important because too many people, I think, get elected, they go to Washington, D.C., they disappear, and the next time they appear, they want your vote. I think you ought to be in and amongst your citizens, your constituents, during the term. So that's how it is. Plus, I let them know about my work in D.C. I'm on the Veterans Affairs Committee. I'm on the Foreign Affairs Committee. So I let them know what I'm doing. I post my floor speeches. I post my testimony in committees. I just tell them what I'm doing in D.C. because I want them to know.
I think it's incredible what you have been able to chalk up as a resume. Most first-term congressmen don't get to do a lot of the things that you've done. Typically, there's a pecking order. You have to work your way in. Your second, third, fourth term before you get a good committee assignment. How much of your success so far do you think is attributed to what you did while you were a military man and the fact that people in D.C. and people have seen enough of Keith Self to know you might be a first-term congressman, but you bring a lot to the table that most first-term Congress people, regardless of where your political affiliation is or where you're from in the country, most first-term Congress people spend most of their time figuring out how things work. You spent so much time in D.C. and the Pentagon and in leadership in CENTCOM and elsewhere in your military career. You've already got a really good idea of how things work. I'd love to hear you talk about that for a second.
Yeah, when I was in the Pentagon, as a matter of fact, I spent quite a bit of time over in the old executive office building in the White House complex. So because I was in the waived special access programs, which means polygraph level classified programs, very, very classified, about as classified as you can get. So I spent some time over there. So I became familiar with the political processes over in the old executive office building. I got to see congressmen. I got to go to the White House Situation Room a number of times. I don't want to make too much of that, a handful of times, to see the deputies level, not the primary secretaries, but the deputy secretary level, discuss some of the most pressing issues of the day. So yes, I had some familiarity with the political process. But frankly, when you get to Congress, your experience does matter, but then they want to know that you're not going to be a backstabber, that you're going to look them in the eye, you're going to tell them where you stand on a bill, because they whip all the bills. Whip means they ask you how you're going to vote, because they want to know they have the votes before they take a vote.
Oh, yeah.
So, when you talk to the whip or the majority leader or even the Speaker of the House, look them in the eye, tell them where you stand, tell them what you need in the bill if you've got something, but just be honest with them. And I think that goes a long way too. They just want to know that you're being consistent. You're being honest with them.
So in the Congress there, do you believe that there are people who absolutely refuse to work with you?
Oh, yeah,
Just
absolutely.
because of an R next to your name?
Oh, yeah. No. Yeah, there's very little interface between the two parties now.
How in the world do we fix that? Because it's just in the last decade or two that it's gotten so polarized. In years past, as recently as the Clinton administration, you've got lots of collaboration back and forth. We disagree amicably. We have lots of different visions for the way things should be done. But at the end of the day, there's still quite a bit of co-sponsors on bills. And you'd see, when the vote tally comes down, it'd be 247 for one, 150 something for the other, or whatever the math is to get to it's 465, right?
We have 435 in the House.
Okay.
Yes.
Whatever the numbers are to add up to 435, that used to be a lot more parity. And now it's just, this party voted that way, that party voted that way, and the crossover between is very, very little. How in the world do we come back from this place of intense polarization and even, vilification of someone with a different letter next to their name? Because from the perspective of a citizen, I'm sitting here going, do we ever come back from this, or is this a downfall of our republic? Is the polarization the beginning of the end for our way of life as an American country? I don't know what the answer is. What's your take on that?
There are some very dangerous forces out there today. One is the surveillance state. It is real. It's deep. The media is all one-sided. I can almost talk to a constituent, and I can almost tell you where they get their news, even on the right side, which source they pull from for their news. But let me just give you one example, because the gulf is widening. The one that I talk about the most is the bill that would have allowed, protected against abortion up to and including the day of birth. Think about that. This was a Republican bill that would have protected against that. 210 Democrats voted for abortion up to and including the day of birth. And there are other examples that I could give you. But on the FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, since I mentioned surveillance, the FISA Reauthorization Act, I said, and we know it's happening, the FBI had hundreds of thousands of cases where they improperly and illegally collected information, emails, conversations, whatever, on American citizens, improperly and illegally. So I said, you have to have a warrant before you collect on a U.S. citizen that is not a target of your investigation, that you don't think is a terrorist. It just tangentially occurred. And we couldn't get that through.
That is terribly alarming, to say the least.
Now, I will tell you, and I use these figures all the time, when it is a truly conservative issue, we max out at about 60 votes in the House of Representatives. If it's a somewhat conservative issue, we max out at 125. Now, remember, it takes 218 to pass anything. 218 is the magic number. 218 to pass a bill out of the House. So 125 or 60 is not going to cut it.
And so, like, when it comes to bills, the first thing that, I don't know if I'm just skewed that way, but when they say, they've got this bill, I always start trying to get the info and where's all the pork coming in. In the bill-making process, do people just gather up and say, hey, and I need $3.5 million for Collin County so that we can fill in the blank? Is that pretty much?
No, that's not the way it goes. We have a noble act, a noble idea. So we turn it into a bill that is an act, okay? So, and frankly, when we first get notification of bills, there's no scoring by the Congressional Budget Office. Now, I don't agree with their scoring to begin with, but you do need some sort of a score. So we just pass bills often with no thought of how much they cost. And that's the problem because, it's a noble idea, but we can't fund every noble idea today because we're so far in debt. We're paying so much in interest. And let me tell you one example from the VA committee that I serve on. You were supposed to have an offset now in mandatory spending. So if you increase something in mandatory spending, you're supposed to have a decrease elsewhere, called an offset. So an offset to me is, we've got a noble program here that we want to institute. We want to do something for veterans, which means to me we need to find a less noble program or a program that's no longer efficient or something. So pull that down to do this more noble program. The only offset that the VSOs, the Veteran Service Organizations, and hence the committee will accept, is we add to the home loan fee program, which veterans pay in the out years. So veterans are paying for every new noble program for veterans. Only veterans are paying, supposedly, in this funny money, and I've got it. It's funny money in Washington, D.C., but that's the only thing we accept, that veterans, our current veterans, pay for new programs for veterans. That's not an offset. That's an increase.
Yeah.
Because they're paying more money in the home loan fee program.
Wow. We want to respect your time, Congressman, and we're about out of time. So I think just as a finish up here, I'll give you the last words. I think we skipped the questions here.
Yeah.
It just doesn't feel feel right.
Yep.
Lightning round and funny little ha-ha things doesn't really seem consistent with the tenor of the conversation here. What is your call to action for the constituents that you want to be voting your way in November? We had your opponent in here, and we gave him the same end to his episode. I want to be, of course, balanced and respectful to you as well. What's the message you want to leave people with that may be undecided? There's a wonderful breadth of experience in Collin County. I think there's probably a larger batch of people that would consider themselves and self-identify as independent, where they don't strongly support either major political party. I would call myself one of those who's in the middle. I tend to vote Republican, but I definitely would not identify as a Republican. What do you say to the constituents of why they should vote for Keith Self it's November 5th, right? November 5th. You've got the last word, sir.
I think you asked the same question that was asked decades ago. Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? And I'm not sure who would say yes because of that inflation that we talked about, because of the pandemic that we saw coming out of, because of the border situation, because of the cartels operating in our county today, our two counties today. So just ask yourself that question. And I think that will lead you to an answer that I prefer, and I think that you will too in the long run. So do your homework. Figure out, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Now, the people who have a 3.5% mortgage rate that are not going to give that up to get a new home, they may be happy with their house, but they may want to do something else too, downsize, move toward closer to the grandkids, or go up. Well, not only are you going to pay more in your mortgage rate, but the houses are so much more expensive. Ask yourself, am I better off today than I was 4 years ago? It's as simple as that.
All right.
Okay. You good?
Yeah.
I don't know any better way to end the episode than that. Congressman Keith Self, thank you so much for your valuable time today. Folks, check out the show notes on the podcast platforms and the description if you're watching on YouTube, and be informed. And the last thing I will say, and I know I speak for Fred with this, get your butt to the polls. For God's sake, people, it is a responsibility as a member of our society. You owe it to your fellow citizens to put your name in the hat, but you have to be informed. Whether you're voting for Sandeep or you're voting for Keith, vote for who you think is going to do a better job representing your interests in Washington, D.C., and that's where I'm going to leave it. Thank you so much for your time today, sir. And that's the end of our episode, folks. I know we're more somber here. It's a more serious note, but you're sitting here with a member of Congress. So there you go. That's it for now. Ladies and gentlemen, have a great day. We'll talk to you again next time.